Welcome back to the COS Business Podcast. My name is Andrew Hasley, and I'm the host of the show. Today, I'm sitting here with Erica Henkel, owner of TrueNorth Holistic Counseling.
Yes, you got it. It's a long one.
Yeah, I mean, it's only 4 words.
Right.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
Right.
And that's cool. So what got you into doing that?
Well, I actually started as an elementary education major in undergrad, thinking that that's what I wanted to do. But pretty quickly, I realized when I thought about a classroom of like 30 kids, I was like, I think I want to do something at a deeper level than be up here teaching. And so a friend of mine was in the social work program and was like, you should try this out. Because I thought about psychology, and she's like, I think social work you can do a lot with. And so I went that route, and I haven't stopped. I worked for a little bit in residential treatment, doing case management, stuff like that, before going back to grad school, because I realized, again, I wanted to go a little bit deeper with people and be able to support them. Especially in residential treatment, there was so much trauma that the kids had experienced. And so I really wanted to learn more about that and ways to help kind of uproot and unearth some of the negative stuff they believe because of their trauma. And so I knew going to grad school would be the route, and got my master's in social work.
And now a word from our sponsors. Power Toolsafe is revolutionizing tool tracking and protection for everybody. With Power Toolsafe, you can protect the equipment that keeps your business running. Go to powertoolsafe.com and start your new account now and register up to $10,000 in tools for free. The People's Tiny House Festival is the nation's largest gathering of simple living, featuring van conversions, bus conversions, and tiny houses, of course. Catch the event in Loveland, Colorado, July 16th and 17th at the Ranch Events Complex. Get your tickets at peoplestinyhousefestival.com/tickets. Sheath Underwear has a pouch for the boys. It is everyday underwear for every man. 100% money back on the first pair if you don't like it. Visit sheathunderwear.com and enter the code COSBP20 to get 20% off your order. Recon Marketing is the fastest growing social media agency in Colorado. Recon focuses on becoming an extension of your business while providing social media management, review management, and digital marketing. Recon Marketing, putting you on the radar. Planet Duct offers astronomical air duct cleaning with the most powerful vacuum trucks in Colorado. They have taken air duct cleaning to a new intergalactic level that is far more powerful and proactive than any on the market in El Paso County or Southern Colorado. Reach out to Planet Duct for any of your air duct cleaning needs. Nice. And so that's awesome.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what does a master's require?
So it's like I had an undergrad in social work, so I could have done it in I think it's about 18 months. But I did it part-time so I could keep working. And I did it in 3 years. And I had an internship. I had to write a thesis and, just took lots of classes.
Nice.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And when you say residential, is that like facilities and stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. A treatment center where kids would come and live for maybe 6 to 9 months or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And get really intensive treatment.
Mm-hmm. And these were kids who were on the streets, maybe involved in crime or something?
So there was a house with older kids, and that was the case for some of those kids. I was actually with a younger group, and so it was oftentimes like kids who were in and out of foster care and just really struggled to because of their behaviors, it was hard for them to maintain a foster family. And so they would come for treatment for a while, or maybe kids who had really severe attachment issues who were adopted and just really struggling with their adoptive family. And so they would come for some treatment, and they would also get family treatment and stuff. So yeah, it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's working with those kids. What was some of the things that you think you learned from that?
Oof, so much.
Yeah.
And it was in my early 20s, so it was a long time ago now. But I think one of the biggest things I learned is that people's behaviors are often based out of survival. And I think I appreciated that the treatment center was really good at teaching us about that they're not just, oppositional. They're not just trying to be a pain in the ass. Like, this is how they learn to survive certain situations. And until we can respect and honor where that comes from, we really have no business trying to change them. So it really also helped me learn to start with that relationship and learn to understand where these things come from rather than judge their behavior just as what it is.
For sure. Yeah, it's always, everyone's gone through something or going through something, you know.
Right.
And whether it's not for anyone to judge how they're handling that, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, some people just don't handle stuff like that well. And especially when you're so young, you're not even fully developed of how to talk with or deal with people, really, for real.
Yeah.
I know I wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
And I was actually in a facility for 3 months when I was 14, 13,
Wow.
I
Yeah.
think, you know.
Yeah.
And that was interesting, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Met some cool people, some good friends, and
Right.
but we weren't there to make friends.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Right. Yeah.
I put hot sauce on everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was not good
bad.
for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that's where I developed putting hot sauce on everything. I
Nice.
think.
Yeah.
So I still do that. I try to
Yeah.
stay away from that as much,
Right.
just because I think it causes internal damage.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, that's a side note. I
Right.
derail all the
That's
time.
right. That's right.
And that's cool. So you were working with other companies, working with kids, and doing residential stuff, and then you got your master's?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after grad school, moved out here and worked with the Family Treatment Drug Court program through an organization called Savio. Worked there for a while. Again, just lots of learning. And then I have worked at a couple different organizations as a therapist. And then last June, finally kind of branched out and went on my own.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What made you really want to take that leap?
I think actually it was a mentor of mine
Good.
who, well, I mean, I've wanted to do it, but I kept being like, well, it's like safer with other people. And she basically said to me, like, Erica, it's really hard to embody your own body of work when you're in someone else's structure. And I think that really resonated with me because I do feel like there are certain areas that I really enjoy working with, and having the freedom to just do it how I want to do it and move forward that way has really actually helped me to kind of embrace those niches here and there. So.
And that makes sense. A lot of people get into business because they want that freedom, I guess.
Right.
And then a lot of people get trapped into their own prison.
Right. Yep.
So that's something to be careful as well. Careful of as well. And so how has your experience been with growing your business?
It's been pretty good so far. You know, I have a pretty steady caseload, but I'm realizing I'm not great at marketing. So as people are getting better,
okay. Yeah.
and they're going to like once every other week or once a month, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to get more people in. And
okay, I get what you're saying. When they get better, they need you less.
Right. Yeah,
and,
which is good.
Yeah,
and that's
what you
always
want,
my goal. Yeah.
But you don't want that to be like a negative incentive for you.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
or even if it's a subconscious thing. It's
right.
Like, are you like that's something to be aware of as well.
Right. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So you're also only a year in. So I mean,
yeah.
the
So
longer
it's
you
normal.
go.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
It'll build.
Yeah. So, and that's where I know we were just talking about how I met you.
Yeah.
Because I was like just the night before I was, talking with my husband about how I'm like, I got to figure out this marketing thing. And then, I was standing in line at Story Coffee behind you and you're talking about the podcast. And so,
and we tell stories. That's what we do. And
exactly.
that's the best type of marketing. Is when you tell stories.
Right.
That's what gets people to invest in you and know you, like you, trust you, all those three factors. Have you heard that yet? The know, like, and trust
No,
thing?
But that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's for anyone that does business with any business, they have to have those three factors: knowing you, liking you, trusting you. And whether it's you specifically as a person or you as a brand, like people, even you can take the biggest brand like Nike, people know what it is, they like it, and they trust that brand. The people who buy Nike. I don't buy Nike. I don't trust them. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
No, I buy Nike sometimes. Not usually though. But yeah, I mean that's kind of those three things for marketing. Understanding that, and it's like, if you just reverse engineer from knowing those three things, what can I be doing? Ask yourself, what can I be doing to get people to know me, like me, trust me? Awareness is the first level, so they know you, and it's like this podcast helps with that. So,
yeah.
So
I
going
appreciate
forward,
that very much.
Yeah. And you can also hire awesome marketing companies like Recon Marketing, which is Marcus's marketing company.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And they typically work with like businesses that are well established and stuff like that. But there's other types of there's other marketing companies too that will work with a startup, work with someone who's just getting started too. Right. And it also, I mean, at the beginning, it's usually best for people to market themselves and
Right.
figure out how to do it. Matthew Beera, he's been a beast at that. Although he does hire it's like more of like a big company that's like national, and you know they have, because they're so big and because they've grown to a massive marketing company, they're able to take on, you know, the clients for smaller packages, you know, and do certain things, and they'll do things like backlinks, and they'll put like backlinks, although I don't think that's as important as some of the other things you could be doing in marketing. But yeah, there's lots of stuff with marketing and it can be intimidating, you know.
Yes, for sure.
Starting a podcast has been one of my main marketing methods for my business, and I think it's like the biggest marketing thing that I could have ever done for my business, because I don't even promote my business on it. At first I was the only sponsor. We had to have one sponsor,
Yeah.
And so I was like, promoting it, but even if I'm not promoting it, I'm on every episode, and that gets people to know me, like me, and trust me, you know?
Yep, exactly.
And so it's like, that's one great thing about marketing, about video as well too, whether it's a podcast or whether you're just putting out video content, is it does get people to know you, like you, and trust you before they even get in a meeting with you. They can, because they can feel your vibe, they can understand who you are as a person, and then it's magic. It's crazy. And you're basically cloning yourself, because 100,000 people can watch a video at any given minute, and like if you were doing that in person, you can't really meet with 100,000 people, you know. And so that's or 1,000 people, and so I'm just throwing out some marketing stuff.
Yeah, thank you. I
It's a business podcast.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so you started your business a year ago. Marketing is kind of really what you really want to you want to get more clients, essentially. Of course, we all do. Or to a point to where we have too much clients, and that's a problem. That's a problem to face when you get there, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the marketing things you've been doing?
So I have a Instagram page. I'm not as consistent with posting on that, but that's one way. I use a service called Psychology Today, that if people Google therapists in Colorado Springs, usually Psychology Today is one of the first things.
And that's like a journal, an article, right?
They have articles and
I've read some stuff from them. I actually read an article from 1999 on there about flow states.
Wow. Yeah, nice.
And I just remember the date because I was doing research. I was making a YouTube video on flow.
Right.
And I was like, this article's from 1999, dude.
Right. Yeah.
It's like that internet probably wasn't even on the internet. They probably just pulled from their archives. Like, are they a magazine too as well?
Yeah, they are.
Nice.
Yeah.
That used to be the thing, you know. If you didn't have a website, you had a magazine.
Yep, that's true.
And I don't remember that. I'm too old for that. The only magazines I paid attention to were probably ones I shouldn't have been paying attention to at that age.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, so that's cool. Yeah. So you got your master's degree. You've been out here for 11 years, about 11 years?
About 11 years now.
Yeah. And I think you said, you told us before we were recording that you actually worked with Nate Wilson's mom.
Yes.
Who was just on the podcast.
Julie Wilson. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I worked with her at my first job, Savio. And then we actually crossed paths again at another organization, Family Care Center. So
nice.
Yeah.
And did she own the practice?
No, but she does now.
Oh,
she owns her
okay.
own practice now.
Nice.
Yeah, we both kind of went out on our own.
That's cool. So do you, like, you were working with kids, and that's what Nate does now,
right?
So do you work with, what do you do now? Like, who is your ideal client?
Actually, now I more so work with adults.
Okay.
I do work with some teenagers, but primarily I work with adults who've experienced trauma. And even though that's a pretty broad thing, it's what I've been specializing. And then in that, I've had a lot of people I work with who have come out of like pretty fundamentalist religious backgrounds, something called purity culture, where it's like a unique form of trauma almost that they've experienced. And so that's where I've been kind of building a little bit of a niche that was unexpected. It just so happened that I would be working with people on other trauma, and this stuff would start to come out as they would be exploring this further. And I myself, grew up in purity culture and that sort of thing. So it kind of, like I have a pretty deep understanding of what it is and how it can kind of affect people.
Can you explain that? I don't know if I'm familiar.
Okay. So, purity culture, I don't know if you ever heard of the True Love Waits movement. But it's basically, about saving yourself for marriage is the biggest thing, which that in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
People often choose abstinence for different reasons and totally reasonable. I think the hard part about purity culture, though, is that there was a lot of shame connected to it. So they would do these things where they'd call them object lessons, where they would take, maybe a cookie and they would be like, okay, we're going to pass this around and take a little piece off of it. Or, maybe somebody drops them on the floor and things like that. Or they would kind of get it dirty, or somebody might spit on it. And they're like, okay, this is what happens if you have sex before you're married. And all these different things, they're taking pieces from you. They're essentially kind of dirtying you and that kind of thing. And so when I talk to a lot of people who've gone through the experience of purity culture, they all have different versions of that story, whether it be chips or a sucker or there's always something that somehow
putting something dirty in your body.
Yeah. And so, because they're you would never want this, right? And just how that really leaves this imprint in the back of your brain around if you were to cross certain lines, then you're dirty and you're bad, just full of shame. Or that if you do decide to save yourself till marriage because of these messages, it's not as soon as you get married, the shame of sex just goes away. And so then there's a lot of issues that come up around that because you for so long are taught this is bad and dirty and wrong. And so those kind of things happen. The other part of it that I think I often see really has been a challenge for women is this idea that how we present ourselves as women, how we dress, can lead men into sexual sin. And so a lot of this kind of we have to help control men's thoughts by how we behave and how we dress. And when you really break it down and you think about it, we can't even control our own thoughts, right? So we can't control the thoughts that pop in our head. We can decide how much we want to entertain them, which takes a lot of practice, a lot of learning. But this idea that we can control someone else's thoughts by how we are and how we present can really mess with your psyche.
For sure.
And so...
could cause people to be rebellious, too.
Right, exactly. Yep. And then in the rebellion have so much shame afterwards because there's just so much shame in that, you're so bad. Not oh, maybe this choice wasn't healthy for you. It's you're bad because you did this. And so... yeah, my work with women has been to really kind of unpack some of those messages so that they can feel powerful in themselves, but not in the way that they're in control of men and their thoughts and that kind of thing. And learning to decide for themselves how they want to dress, who they want to be without these specific roles. Because that's the other piece too is there's very clear gender roles. Of men should be a certain way and women should be a certain way. So it can be really damaging, not just for women, but obviously also for men. Because then there's this idea that oh, you just can't control yourself as a man. Men are dangerous and, we need to take care of them that way. So, and those are, I will say, really subtle, insidious messages. I think on the surface, it doesn't look
and that's why it's probably accepted so widely in a lot of cultures, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I do also want to say, I know that it's a lot of well-intentioned adults who just wanted what they felt was best for their kids and probably didn't understand the repercussions of some of those messages. And so I always take that stance of I don't think there was specific harm that these leaders who were teaching it were trying to create.
Well, Hitler didn't, Hitler thought he was doing a good thing too.
Right. So, just kind of, but trying to understand more deeply how that's impacted you and how to move forward. So, like I said, it's kind of a niche that sort of fell in my lap. And I've been enjoying being able to work with women, supporting them around that, and even more recently started a group so that women can come together and kind of talk about how it's affected them and feel like they're not so alone in it.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah.
So it's that's similar to what the Westboro Baptist Church does? Or they're an extreme
They're
version
the
of it?
extreme.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. But they have those beliefs just turned all the way up to 11.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
we're going to clip this and we're going to get a bunch of people saying, you just compared us to Hitler.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's not do that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that'll be on me.
Right,
You didn't compare them to Hitler.
Right.
That's not what you were intending, but I was just trying to make an extreme point. You know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So that's kind of what you mainly focus on. What does the holistic part mean?
So that is really related to bringing the body into therapy. So oftentimes, a lot of therapy is that talk therapy. It's very cognitive, conversational, and that can be helpful to a certain degree. But I found when you start to include the body and especially the nervous system, changes start to happen on a different level, because so often when we don't even realize it, we're in nervous system responses.
Yeah.
And especially even you can be to a certain degree in talk therapy as you're talking about certain things that have been overwhelming to you. And so I love supporting people in identifying like their nervous system responses. And so if you don't mind, I'll maybe go through some of them because I think there's some newer ones that people aren't as aware of, because there's the whole, I'm sure you've probably heard of fight and flight. Mm-hmm. Those are the most common ones. And that's basically outside of like the specific situation. When it's a longer term nervous system response might just look like a lot of anger, irritability, that kind of thing for fight. Even like a lot of muscle tension in your gross motor muscles, your arms, your legs, like just ready to fight. And then flight is this, I need to get out of here as fast as I can. And so sometimes when you're in situations where you can't, you might flight out of your body and be a little bit dissociative.
Shut down.
Mm-hmm. Or the shutdown of like almost stonewalling type behavior. And again, prolonged, that more looks like maybe the stonewalling or kind of dissociative. There's also a freeze response, which is becoming more commonly aware, or people are more aware of that. And it's basically when the autonomic nervous system that pushes us into fight or flight and the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what calms us down, are like activated at the same rate. And so right now I'm pushing my hands together, and to you it probably looks like nothing, but there's a lot of force here.
Okay.
And so it basically causes a stillness. And that's what happens in our brains when we go into freeze, where it's just like you're stuck.
Like a deer in headlights kind of.
Deer in headlights, yep. Your brain goes blank, that kind of thing. Sometimes also then freeze more prolonged. It looks like I can't get off the couch. I know that there are things I need to do, but I'm feeling stuck. And then the two newer ones that are not quite so publicly aware is fawn, which I don't really love that word for this. It's basically like people pleasing. But
FAWN?
Yep. But I think they want to keep with the Fs.
Okay, gotcha.
So the fawn response is when you're in a situation that maybe you don't feel like you can get out of and you can't fight your way out of it. And so it's, if I comply and give you what you want, maybe this will end sooner. And then prolonged, that looks like I'll just kind of please you and make sure, like, if I take care of you in this way, then I'll be safe. And then the final one is
I think I do a lot of the fawning.
Yeah, a lot of people do. I think it's way more common than people recognize as a trauma response or a nervous system response.
I do it in like a strategic way too. Like I'll do think so many steps ahead just to avoid certain things.
Right.
And I think I learned that from having an abusive stepfather growing up. So.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. You have to keep yourself safe. And so that's a really, I think, wise way, especially for kids. It's like people get upset with themselves later on in life as they're like, oh, I'm such a people pleaser and I'm so frustrated with this. And also just taking a moment to honor, like, wow, you as a child were so smart because this is how you figured out you could survive this setting. And just honoring that before we even start working with, like, how can we shift this if it's not serving you anymore?
For sure. Is that camera still going? Yep. Awesome.
Okay.
I had it in the back of my head and it was going to bug me if I didn't ask.
Oh, yeah.
Is that camera going? Yep. Nice.
Yeah.
Is that alive? Nice. We're live.
Oh, hey. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
We're trying some different things, going on. So
Nice.
it's not going to be the whole episode live, just
Right.
a live
Certain
clip.
parts. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Right.
Yeah. So what's the next?
And then the last one is flop.
Okay.
And this one is more extreme. This would be where you basically are in a setting you can't get out of and you faint. It's like it's like your body wants to play dead for you because they're like, we just can't get out of this.
What's the difference between shutting down and that one?
So flop is actually like your whole body kind of shuts down and you faint, versus like freeze, you're still aware, like you're still here. Your body can still do what it needs to do, but
the body shuts down too?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's extreme.
What's a situation where that would happen? Seeing blood, maybe?
Some people do. Yeah. Or just maybe in, like, let's say, I'm trying to think of something that won't be super triggering for people listening. But if you're in a situation maybe that's really extreme, really dangerous, and you just can't get out, it's just that, like, okay, I'm done.
So that could be like maybe a hostage situation.
Yes, yeah, something like that.
Really, really bad.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, interesting.
So, yeah, so I like to just give that basic background to people, because when you really break them down, and sometimes I break those down even a little bit further, you start to see this idea where they say sometimes states, like nervous system states, start to look like traits. And then we believe that this is who we are. Like I said, we start to believe we're a people pleaser. We start to believe we're just an angry person. All these different things.
And you feed that, and then you actually become that.
Right. And so being able to step back, and when you have this sort of background knowledge of like, okay, this might have been a nervous system state that I was in for a prolonged period of time, which helped me survive, and just honoring that like survival piece. And then from there to move forward and be like, okay, how can we start to unpack this, and to kind of, more than learning in therapy, I feel like you're unlearning and like unlearning these ideas that I'm just an angry person or a bad person or whatever it might be, and look at how these things have affected you and how they've developed these core beliefs that you're operating out of, that then in some ways do feel like the self-fulfilling prophecy. And like, let's step back and just kind of break those all down and see who you are outside of all of this, because that's really not the truth of you.
How do you break that down?
So like I said, first there is an element of talk therapy where I'm getting kind of like a history of things, but then also throughout that, I'm asking people to check in with their bodies and their nervous systems. And then, like I said, I like to explain the nervous system states. And then usually people are like, oh yeah, like how you did. You're like, oh, I think I do this a lot, and I think it's because of this. And so then we can work with that. I'm also trained in something called EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which you don't have to worry about that. It's a mouthful.
I like it.
Yeah, but basically it's finding that using bilateral stimulation, so it can be eye movements, which is where the EM comes from, of looking left, right, or it can be tapping left, right, or these paddles that you can hold in your hand that vibrate in one hand than the other. And as it goes back and forth, that seems to have a calming effect on the nervous system. So initially you have this trigger as you're thinking about it and talking about it, but then that helps calm the nervous system, so you can start to have a little bit more clarity in reprocessing. Because when we're in an activated state, which, like I said, I think we are more than we often give credit for.
What's an activated state? Like one of those four?
Yeah, okay. One of the nervous system states. Then it basically kind of shuts down our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain where we can have clarity of thought and kind of.
And mine's already smaller because I have ADHD.
Right. Like, yeah.
I just found that out, that people with ADHD have smaller, like, frontal brains.
Yep.
Frontal brains.
Right.
Yeah, because that's what the frontal means, right?
Right. Yeah. So that can kind of help with some of that. And then, I do some stuff with like inner child work of almost like reparenting then that version of you. So EMDR is one way I can do it. Some people don't like EMDR, so then I do a lot of the inner child work around, okay, so like, let's bring that version of you to mind, and like, what does she need right now? And what do you think would have been helpful for her to hear? And like, and also at the same time, keep checking in with your body and noticing like, oh, are you starting to get activated when this little version of you comes in the room? And how do we soothe you so that you can soothe this part of yourself that didn't get her needs met? And so that's a way. And then, just also encouraging people to find practices that help them get into their body in a soothing way outside of therapy, because that's the biggest thing too, is I can spend this hour with you a week, but if it's not being continued in some way outside of therapy, it can be somewhat helpful, but not as effective as it could be. And so that's where, I encourage people to develop mindfulness practices, because I also have some training in yoga therapy. And so kind of using, the body, the mind, getting them connected in order to support self-soothing can be really helpful. And so like our 5 senses are some of the easiest ways to do that, to consciously connect with your senses and your environment can be really helpful in just creating like a sense of safety within yourself.
So it sounds like it's pretty similar to what hypnosis would be. Going into those states, not like full hypnosis. And I know hypnosis has a lot of like bad rap,
Right.
But when I'm talking about hypnosis, I'm talking about really letting your guard down, on a subconscious level,
Right.
And do you listen to Andrew Huberman's podcast?
I haven't. I heard him on another podcast, and he's on my list of people to listen to.
His podcast specifically is amazing. When he's on other people's podcasts, that's cool, but he actually spends hours and hours and hours of like going through textbooks for every episode he does.
Wow.
And each episode is specific to one type of thing.
Wow.
And so that's really, I really learned a lot about ADHD.
Oh, yeah.
They're like 2-hour long episodes.
Wow.
And like just full like master classes essentially of specific this thing, or like ADHD was one of the things. And he talks about, I think, some similar things that you were talking about. He cites all his sources. It's an amazing podcast.
Yeah, because he's a neuroscientist.
Yes,
is that right? Yeah.
And he talks about this thing called Yoga Nidra. Do you
know
what that is?
Oh, okay. I love Yoga Nidra. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah. So Yoga Nidra is basically a deep meditative practice, and it also includes the body. It kind of does like a really deep body scan, but it's not just like, oh, relax this part of your body. It's just bring all your mental attention to your right big toe and then the next toe, and kind of like
have a Kill Bill.
Yeah.
Wiggle your big toe.
Right. Yeah. So you just like go through your body, and it's deeply relaxing, but basically and there's a lot of different ways of doing it. Oftentimes you set an intention at the beginning of it of what you're kind of wanting to work with or hope for. Then you do the body scan, you do some breathing. And the biggest thing about it is that it tries to bring you into that state. And I think, especially if you've practiced it quite a bit, you can start to more quickly get into the state where you're between being awake and asleep. That kind of, when you're like
deep,
drifting.
I think he calls it deep or something. I forget the words.
Yeah.
But it was like, you're not asleep, but it's like deep rest,
Yes, yeah. And they say that it's really helpful for our brains, really helpful for resetting our brains. And it's just deeply relaxing, I think, for our bodies. And and some people use it for sleep, even though technically people who are like really technical about Yoga Nidra are like, this is not for sleep.
Yeah.
Because like you said,
he does it before he does a podcast, actually. So he's like fully in center. And because his podcasts are intensive. Sometimes he's doing them for like 8 hours,
Wow.
Because he goes through a lot of information. That's why it's like, it's so amazing that these scientists are starting podcasts and doing these things and, basically doing the public a service by letting people know all this information for free,
right.
public access.
Totally.
And what's cool is it's incentivizing for them because they get to make millions of dollars off of the podcast.
It's true. Yeah. It works for everyone.
And the reason why you wouldn't see those things popping up before podcasting really came off is because these scientists have spent years and years of like learning this stuff and they needed to make money,
Right. Yep. It's true.
And so it's like now they can monetize their knowledge, and I think it's just so awesome.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I can't wait to get him on the podcast one of these days.
Yeah, oh, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. I got some wish list guests that I would like to get on.
Nice.
Oprah's one of them.
Oh, that would be awesome too.
Yeah. Can't wait for her to come down to Colorado
go to her house and Telluride. And
she has a house in Telluride.
That's what I've heard. I don't know if it's still there. But,
thanks for that insight. Now I'm going to stalk her. No, I'm
right?
just kidding.
Yeah.
That's cool. So yeah, those are the 4. Can you list them real quick?
Oh, the nervous system responses?
Yeah.
So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and then like the extreme flop.
Okay, and then you take that into account, and then you take the holistic approach, which probably means like not just like how you're feeling your body, but what are you putting into your body, maybe?
A little bit.
Okay. That's not what you specialize in.
Yeah, that's not what I specialize in.
Do you have someone you refer that to, maybe?
There are some like nutrition therapists, and actually the owner of the studio where I have my office.
Nice.
She's a nutrition therapist, Jessica Patterson.
Awesome.
She does a lot of different things. She's really amazing. So I don't know how much she's doing nutrition therapy anymore, if she still does it. But yeah, that's one of the things that she's definitely studied.
Okay, so it's mainly just like, how can we understand your psychology and what you're going through physically and emotionally.
Right. And then also, I think because I'm a social worker, I have this also perspective of we as individuals are in the context of this greater society. And sometimes there are also systemic issues that are affecting you.
Yeah.
And so being able to look, it's kind of like zooming out and looking at the big picture sometimes, because otherwise, I mean, we can get really caught in the weeds here with the individual, but sometimes it's like, yeah, you're feeling these things, but also you've lived this life where you have been, you know, experiencing a lot of racism towards you. And so how is that affecting you? Because we can't just pretend it's all just in your head and your own thoughts, you know, because that's just not accurate.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think my whole philosophy is just kind of like looking at the person within systems, whether it be their own physical system, their own family system, or the greater system.
Yeah. And, you know, some things may be, you know, all in your head, you know, some things your own limiting beliefs, your own personal beliefs of who you are. And, you know, I actually do struggle with a lot of anger issues. I would like to, let's work it out. No, I'm just kidding. How many sessions does that usually take to work something like that out?
It really depends on the person. I'm really bad at guessing for people. Just because each person goes, I think, at different paces. It depends on like how ingrained this is in like your nervous system and in your brain, all those neural pathways that for years have just been like, here's the trigger, here's the anger, that kind of thing. And so kind of, it depends on the person. I know that's not helpful.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I say the same thing when I do quote a project for video production. You know, it depends on the project. You know, and you know, and also the person. You know, sometimes people are just slow to respond back.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
And so yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So what would you say are some kind of typical causes for anger issues, I guess?
I really think a lot of it is just some sort of trauma. And I also want to reframe trauma. I don't know if I should say reframe. I think a lot of people are starting to become more aware of this, but before it was seen as basically just the precipitating event. People would be like, well, that's trauma. That's traumatic. But really it's about what happens to the nervous system in your body when you're in this overwhelmed event, maybe. So that's why for some people, when they're growing up, if they get bullied, it is a traumatic event because it overwhelms their body and their nervous system and their sense of self.
And one person's trauma is another person's brush it off their
shoulder.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. Some people are like, oh, that's not true. Yeah. I don't care what you say about me, you know? And so that's where it basically just comes from maybe a situation that your nervous system and your being felt like you couldn't quite escape, or that it was just so overwhelming that you shut down in some way. And then that's, if you didn't have the chance to process it at the time, which a lot of people don't, because we don't even recognize it for what it is, you know, it leaves an imprint in your nervous system. And that's where like the trauma in our body lies. And then
I just had a flashback, actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I was a hostage once.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd actually never even really talked about that because I'd never thought about it as a hostage situation. But recently looking back at it, it definitely was, you know.
Yeah.
And it was like overnight. It was pretty crazy.
Wow.
We won't get into it.
Right.
I mean, I could. I'm really open with getting into things, but I don't think I'm ready to get into that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. But definitely, you know, when you're in that space where you're so overwhelmed and can't leave, or feel like you can't leave,
or forced to not be able to leave.
Exactly. Yeah. Then that really can imprint itself in your nervous system. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So where do you what is your goals with your business? What do you what's your big vision? Like if you have a big vision, and I'm sure you do.
Right. Yeah.
What is
So,
that?
well, I think about a few things. I think I've never been, even though I kind of have this little bit of this niche right now with religious trauma and trauma, I also have always just been like, oh, this is interesting now. This is interesting now. But something right now that I'm doing also is working with some local nonprofits to support their teams around burnout, because it's just been a hard few years for everybody. And especially in the nonprofit realm where you're helping some of the most under-resourced people, and like maybe chronically ill or chronically in need people, and that really starts to weigh heavy. And so I've really enjoyed being able to work with staff around like supporting them. And each nonprofit, I do it a little bit differently because I really want to tailor it to their staff and what do they need to help reduce burnout and to help process vicarious trauma. Because when you're hearing these stories or seeing these things happen over and over again, you can start to develop trauma symptoms yourself, even if you haven't experienced it yourself that way. So I like to work with the nonprofits doing that. And one of my big visions is how could I also bring this into other organizations as well, and maybe some of the corporate world, thinking about the Great Resignation that's been happening. And I know I saw an article recently, and I really wish I could remember who did the research, but Adam Grant had mentioned it. He's an organizational psychologist.
Nice.
And
for the corporate stuff.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
Yeah. And it was basically like more than anything else, it was toxic work culture. Like more than even maybe pay, even though that can be an element of it sometimes, it's this toxic work culture. Yeah. And so I would love to be able to support corporations, their leadership teams around how can you improve the work culture? How can you have a little bit more compassion or maybe even just a basic understanding of trauma and how that might look in employees and how sometimes these settings can re-traumatize or re-trigger things in people. And so I would love to, someday work with businesses around creating just safer emotional environments.
Which is huge, and that's because that bleeds into every aspect of our society.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe not even big corporations. I mean, maybe a business with 15 employees.
Oh, yes, any business. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big corporation because I mean, a business with 15 employees, that's a lot of people. That like they may even be more manageable for you at this point.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's probably true. Yeah. So I enjoy, and I have done some public speaking around like mindful leadership and things like that. So incorporating some of that stuff and just in the way I'd want to do it, just like I'm doing with the nonprofits, is in person and tailoring it to the organization. So I know it's hard because sometimes people are like, well, tell us exactly what you're going to give us. And I'm like, well, I would hear some basic things, but I really want to make sure that I am here to support your needs, which looks different for everyone.
Yeah. And is there a way you could get like systematized things?
Probably. Okay. Yeah. Like, so there'd probably be like almost like a skeleton type structure that I would have. And then from there, work with them more specifically on their organizational needs.
Do you have anybody in mind for that?
At this point, I don't.
Okay, I can think of one person,
Okay.
A sponsor of the show, actually.
Okay.
Planet Duct. He really is. He cares about his employees, so he may already be doing something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But like he talked about like having a mental health day when he was on the podcast. It's like I was like, what do you do if someone doesn't show up? He was like, maybe they just needed a mental health day. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, that's cool, dude.
Right. Yeah.
And so I mean, that's potentially someone. I mean, how are you going to market that?
That's what I'm trying to learn. Yeah. So I mean, part of it is I need to flesh it out more. And then I think I was just going to start with, social media, like create a post, especially on on Instagram would be one, but then LinkedIn also, where it's like the professional network.
That would be huge. Like that may be what you want to double down on. You maybe even just cut everything out and just focus on LinkedIn.
Right.
And make some posts. And next thing you know, someone in New Jersey reaches out to you because they have a team of like 20 people and they want you to come there and help them, or maybe even with a lot of telehealth. That has been huge. That blew up in COVID.
Right.
A lot of like BetterHelp really they doubled down on their advertising because they and then they got more money and then they tripled down on their advertising.
Right.
I don't know if you've seen it.
It's everywhere. Yeah.
They sponsor literally 1,000 podcasts.
Oh, I believe it. I feel like every podcast that I listen to.
And I went through all of it because I was on BetterHelp and I went through the referral list because I was mining data, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it said who referred you, and it shows you the whole list of everyone that could have referred you.
Wow.
And I counted each one, and I wrote them down. And
Wow.
I was getting really anal with that.
Yeah.
I guess you could say. But I just thought it would be good to know like their strategy because I have a podcast,
Right.
And and then they also like on Facebook ads, and they're everywhere, like every kind of advertisement. And they've just been able to market themselves really well. And like they've done some really awesome videos. Yeah. One of the videos advertisements that they did, it was like they showed and visualized in the best way I've seen it what anxiety feels like.
Wow.
Like they did it without words, it was just purely like production. And it was just like, wow, that really like, the walls were coming in and like things were going, like it was really intense. And I was like, they've nailed it with that. That was really cool.
That's awesome.
And like as someone who does video marketing, that's something that stands out to me as well. So
right.
So yeah. So you take on one-on-one clients and you work with them for a period of time, however long they need to help them get better.
Yeah.
And that's your main thing you do, but you would like to lean into working for businesses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
interesting.
Essentially.
Yeah. And if that's really what you want to do, like I think I say go for it.
Right.
I say figure out the plan, figure out what that looks like, and then start marketing it. If you have to reach out to someone, even if it's consulting, there's a lot of people like that will like do it. It's like you do with the counselor, like you do as counseling, but they'll do it like as coaching or consulting, and maybe find someone and I don't know, just throwing out ideas. You don't got to do any of that.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, sweet. So yeah, is there anything else you'd like to talk about before we close this out?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I just really appreciate you giving me the opportunity and the platform, and conversation has been really nice. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and what you do, because I think it's important for people to know about what you do.
Yeah.
And whether they choose someone else or you, like I think that's maybe someone saw what this episode and they specifically have purity trauma and they'll reach out to you. I think that'd be awesome. Maybe they didn't even know it was trauma until they heard this episode. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's cool though. But so this has been the COS Business Podcast, and we'll see you guys on the next one.